Hello, ladies and gentlemen, board game enthusiasts of all ages. Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Escape the Board podcast. As always, I'm your host, Connor Sligowski, and my co-host,
Charles Holm. Hey, welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about some tabletop RPGs. Specifically, I think today we wanted to dig into D&D a little bit. Definitely one of the more popular tabletops. Probably a lot of you are very familiar with it already, but just wanted to give you kind of our take on it.
Yeah, D&D is an absolute classic. I mean, I couldn't tell you when the game started. It had to have started, in the 70s or something?
You know what? I feel really dumb right now because I've definitely looked that up a couple of times and I should know it, but yeah, it was like the 60s or 70s.
Yeah, and I mean, this game has evolved so much over the years, and for those of you, again, if you're watching this, you're probably familiar, but we're on 5th edition, and this game is so streamlined and easy to learn now.
Well, maybe. So, well, not maybe on the streamline, maybe on the 5th edition, because they've been pushing for the last year or so
on D&D 1.
On 1 D&D. So maybe by the time you're watching this, that's what the standard is.
Possible.
At the time of recording, 5th edition is the standard.
And I think what we're going to do is just delve into the game a little bit. Maybe you're familiar with it. Maybe you're a brand new player. I know there's still a lot of people getting into this game to this day. I mean, one of the players that plays with us in our game, his name is David, and he's only fresh into the game about a year.
Fresh with us, yeah. We kind of offered him a spot at our table, and it's the first time he'd ever picked up the game.
So it's definitely a game that is still very much growing. It's thriving in the world of TTRPG for good reason. And
all the time I'm hearing about people that are getting into D&D. I don't really think I hear about people leaving D&D. There was a little snafu there for a while where people were looking at transitioning to like Pathfinder and stuff. But I mean, people don't just stop playing RPGs. The only reason people tend to stop is because they stop having groups around them that are playing.
Right. We've had that issue a couple of times where we don't have a group to play with, so we're not able to play, but that doesn't really stop us from enjoying the game in other ways, whether it's finding videos like this or building characters and just anything to get into the game. And there are a lot of people that have that kind of dedication to this game, and hopefully you're one of them. And even if you're not, we're glad you're here.
Yeah, even if you're not dedicated to D&D or to tabletop RPGs in general, definitely something I highly recommend checking out. It is a very social experience, and if you can get really into your characters, it's an interesting way to escape kind of modern reality.
I think that's a really good point. And honestly, I think that's what we use it a lot for, is, as he said, as Charles just mentioned, it is a good escape. Not only is it a good escape into your character, but it's a good escape outside of everyday responsibility, because it's you and your friends sitting down at a table. Well, hopefully you're friends, maybe you're strangers and you're learning how to play.
Yeah, lots of people play online. I know we were looking into Roll20 for a while, a few years back. Great opportunity to meet random people online just to sit down and play a game. Or a lot of times what's popular in some areas is something called Adventures League, where a bunch of strangers will just meet up at like the mall or the library or whatever, and they'll sit down and they'll just play D&D together. People that probably don't know each other very well.
Yeah, like I was saying, this game is it's very easy to escape into, because you're surrounded by people of like-mindedness, and you're delving into a totally different world that is nothing like the world we live in today. There is very little technology, if any, depending on your dungeon master.
Well, and it depends on your game too. Obviously, like we're talking about D&D today, there is a little bit of technology introduced, but I mean RPGs in general, there's plenty out there they've
ranged so far.
There's modern day superheroes.
Yeah.
There are games we've played that kind of work in like a Earth 1960s era.
Right. So you got everything from horror mystery.
I think
you
overstated already. It's everything.
Yeah, the realm of tabletop RPG expands so far that literally can't cover all of them.
No, definitely not. So for a while I was trying to look into a bunch of different RPG systems, and what I found was an almost incomprehensible list. It was so dense. Literally hundreds and hundreds of different RPGs.
Yeah. It's so intense. But I think a good starting point for anybody is Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, no,
and with that, I think we can probably get into characters.
Well, sure, one thing that D&D really has going for it, I would, in other videos, we've talked a lot about, like, what are some entry-level games for this kind of thing? Well, D&D is the classic entry-level.
The entry-level TTRPG.
Yeah, it's they've really honed their system to allow newcomers to delve into how the mechanics of RPGs are supposed to work.
Yeah, and it's so simple that, I mean, you need one set of dice. If you're not familiar with polyhedral dice, I mean, it's a set of 7 dice.
Yeah.
And each die is fairly intuitive. You've got a certain number of sides from D20 down to a D4. Not every number in between, mind you. But you roll a die, you do some calculations, and that is the mechanics of the game.
Yeah, more or less, in a nutshell. The thing is, you don't even need a full set of dice.
Facts.
One thing that I see consistently over and over again in our playthroughs is I almost never touch the percentile dice.
Yep, which are the D10s for those that are unfamiliar with the system.
Not to say you won't ever need them, because there's definitely situations where they come up. But I almost never touch the percentile. I either use the D10 or the D12. Almost never both.
Yep.
And the D4 just doesn't come up as much as you would think it would.
Unless you're looking at, like, caltrops or something.
Right. But that's the thing, is that, like, even if you're using caltrops, there's just so niche situations where they pop up.
Rogues that use daggers will use a D4,
That's true.
It's pretty niche situation in order to pull the D4 out. The main thing, to kind of sum up what Charles was just talking about, D20,
D6.
D6. Those are the two main ones.
Yeah, and then you need either
everything else is going to be situational,
a D8 and a D10 or a D12.
Everything else is going to be situational, and because the system revolves around the D20.
Well, speaking of revolving, actually, not to D&D, there's actually a D&D adjacent system that I have the rule book for. Actually, right here, it's up on the...
You're looking at Spelljammer?
No, it's not Spelljammer. It's hiding behind the tiles. It's all the way up against the wall in the cubby. Anyway, point aside, it's called XD20, where they've cut out all the other dice, and it is literally just the D20 for every single roll.
Right, you picked that up at Salt Lake Comic-Con.
Yes, I did. Fan X now is what they're calling it, because legal reasons was...
Legal reasons.
I picked that up in Salt Lake at a convention, so it was a pretty fun find.
Great convention, by the way. If you ever find yourself available to attend Fan X in Salt Lake, top tier.
Have you ever been to any other convention?
I cannot say I have, but I'm going off of other people's opinion that have been to other conventions.
I will say...
It is, I believe, the second largest convention in the United States.
I will say, from my personal experience,
third or fourth.
Having only ever been to the Salt Lake Fan X,
top tier.
It is the best convention I've ever been to.
Same. Anyways, a little off topic, but yeah. So, I mean, as Charles was just talking about, the D20, right? XD20?
Yeah, XD20, but
just uses the D20 for all calculations. So if you're looking for an even simpler game where there's less dice to roll, that's the system to check into.
And if you're looking for more complicated games, there's also RPG systems out there. There are systems out there that don't even use the base 7. I know that there's a few systems out there that'll have you rolling like a D30 or a D13.
Really? That's new to me.
Yeah. They're not very common, but if you look in game stores, every now and then you'll find sets of dice that run on the odd numbers instead of the even numbers.
Interesting.
Yep.
as I mentioned, Pathfinder is another TTRPG that was built adjacent to version 3.5. So it's still got that same kind of heavy feel to the 3.5 version, where there's still a lot of meat to the game, and it's not quite as streamlined.
3rd edition D&D was really designed for customization. Like, if you wanted to go absolutely wild with what your character was going to look like, 3rd edition and 3.5 was the way to go. And then when D&D moved on to 4th edition, a lot of the fans...
You mean the edition that doesn't exist?
A lot of fans of the kind of fantasy realm RPGs were like, okay, well, we need something that's 3.5 and not going to... I mean, obviously, when 4th edition came out, I kept playing 3.5.
A lot of people did. There's a reason 4th edition doesn't get talked about.
To this day, I have not personally touched 4th edition.
There's a reason.
But yeah, a lot of people really love 3rd edition mechanics, and so they're like, okay, well, we need to make something kind of this that's going to stay this.
Yeah.
But yeah, Pathfinder is a very, very customizable game where you can just kind of
do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Build whatever character you want. Almost no limitations. Yeah, it's a very flexible game. Also a much more complicated game because there are so many choices.
Yeah, I've read through the rule book a couple of times. I haven't ever gotten into a group, and I know we've talked about it a couple of times, but I've never been in a group that was ready to sit down and play Pathfinder.
Yeah.
So I still haven't experienced it myself, unfortunately. But I do own the book, and I've looked through it several times, and I think the big thing that stands out is, for me, as far as ease of access, I think the layout of the handbook of D&D 5th edition is a lot more comprehensible. It is easier to find what you're looking for, and it's easier to pick up specific rules faster.
Right. And that actually is a good segue back into our character development.
Yeah.
This book is laid out, especially in the character building section. It is a step-by-step process laid out in the player's handbook that gives you everything you need to do. It is pick your background, roll your stats, which don't quote me on the order there.
Yeah, you're already way off.
Yeah, I'm sure I am. Background's last.
Background is last. Background is last. Well, technically, equipment is part of player customization, so equipment comes after background. Anyway, so yeah.
There are specific steps where you pick your race, you pick your class, you pick your background.
A race?
You roll your stats.
So like I can be like Asian? What do you mean race?
No, so Dungeons & Dragons is played in a high fantasy sort of situation. The primary world of D&D is called Faerun, and you're going to be picking from humans, obviously. You could be Asian if you so choose.
If I so choose.
But you are also picking from creatures such as half-orcs, half-elves, elves themselves.
Creatures, huh?
Dragonborns.
I think they prefer to be referred to as people.
Humanoids. I don't know if you could call it dragonborn people.
Well, Dragonborn can call Dragonborn people.
There you go. But dragonborns, tieflings, which are demon people, demonic people, demon adjacent.
Yeah, no, there's some questions as to their technical origins.
Yeah.
A lot of times they are referred to as demonic, but if you look into their backgrounds, for some reason their variants are very devilish.
Fair enough.
Which D&D makes a distinction between devils and demons. They're two very polar,
very separate, branches of the same tree.
To be clear, in the D&D universe, the devils and demons are actively at war with one another.
Right. Anyhow, so you pick a race, and then you also pick a class, which is your profession of sorts.
Well, I mean, yes and no. So I was thinking about this the other day, and really, so your background is really more of your profession. It's your professional skill set. Your class is really more of your personal lifestyle. So like if we were to translate it into real world kind of stuff, like you would be a human. Your background is in computer graphic design.
Yeah.
Okay. And your class, I'm just throwing this out here, you'd be like a camper. right? I'm more of a hiker or a climber, right? This is the thing that I do while I'm out in the world. But when I get back into the main world, the background is really what speaks to what they prefer to do. And so you see where I'm coming from with that?
Take on it.
Yeah.
I can see where you're coming from. Don't know if I can 100% get behind it, but I see where you're coming from.
Just kind of spitballing this the other day. I haven't really worked out all the kinks of the analogy. But
for me, the background is what I used to do. The background
it very much is.
The background is, I've got the charlatan background, which isn't necessarily a profession, but some people swindle for a profession.
It most definitely is a profession.
So
there are professional swindlers.
There are.
Yeah.
So, as a charlatan, I used to hustle people out of money on the street. I'm no longer doing that. Now, my profession is an adventurer.
Exactly.
But
your class is your style of adventuring.
Okay. Yes. I get where you're coming from.
So if you were to, give up on life is stupid, I want to quit my job, and I'm just going to go live in the woods. Right. Yeah. So then the question is, well, what kind of adventurer explorer are you? Again, I really would consider you more of like a camper, right? And I'm more of like a climber.
I can see that. Yeah. Okay. I can get on board with that analogy a little bit better now.
So yeah, absolutely, you're right. It's like, hey, this was my job, putting it all behind me. Time to start living off the grid.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I get where you're coming from. Anyhow, so you pick your race. You pick your class, which is how you are adventuring.
Yes.
Anywhere from the cleric, who is a religious priest of sorts. To the ranger, who is basically what we've been talking about with your analogy. He's the camper. He's the wildman.
To the barbarian,
that is just pure rage.
Outdoor, burly, I'm going to just punch everything into oblivion.
Right. And there's a total of 14 official classes, I believe.
Yes.
13 in the books. I don't know if Blood Hunter has ever been published.
What book is Artificer in?
Artificer is in, I believe, Tasha's.
Is it in Tasha's?
I think it's in Tasha's.
Well, now I feel really dumb because I've read Tasha's like 3 or 4 times. And
it might be in... Xanathar's. It might be in Xanathar's.
I'm pretty sure it's not Xanathar's. Well, now we're doing research, so excuse us for just a second.
There's nothing wrong with doing a little on-camera research. Artificer, right there.
Yeah, okay. So
it is in Tasha's.
In the main player's handbook, the original baseline book, you start with 12 different class options.
Yeah.
In Tasha's, they introduced one more, and then there's one more that was...
I believe the Blood Hunter has officially been published. I'm not sure what book it's in.
That's fair. To my knowledge, Blood Hunter is not in a book, but it's definitely available on D&D Beyond, which is the official website for all things D&D.
Yes. And of course, this game, at its conception, 5th edition, was built for the players, and in such a way that they've actually given players free reign to create their own mechanics, their own races, their own classes, their own homebrew aspects of the game. And so even if you don't enjoy what's published in the books, you can find something to play.
If you can't find something, then talk to your DM about making something that you want to play.
Homebrew is a very popular aspect of this game. And it's an aspect we actually take advantage of quite a bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Our table loves to add new quirks and classes. We haven't really played around with homebrewing races very much.
No.
But definitely we've added some funky class variants.
Absolutely. And not even just class variants. So I think that pretty much... Is there anything else we want to touch on mechanics, on character building? Because that kind of gives me a segue...
Well, sure, but let me just...
Might lose my segue. That's fine.
No, you're good. Let me just wrap it up real fast with saying, in D&D, what you want to do is you want to make a character that you're going to play in this fantasy realm, and you get to pick all the little quirks and baubles about this character. You get to decide how they act, what they look like, what they're good at, And
building characters is something we actually both very much enjoy.
Absolutely.
Theory crafting is what it's called, is just going through the rules and trying to find the best way to build any character idea.
Yeah, just coming up with a funky idea that, maybe you haven't tried before, or maybe you heard someone was like, oh, hey, this would be a silly thing to do, and trying to figure out how to make it work.
Speaking of trying to make things work, this is a little bit off topic, but I watched a TikTok video the other day.
Okay.
It was a guy that has a series of videos where he's showcasing busted D&D builds. And he showcased a level 3 build using the winged tiefling variant.
Okay.
Taking 1 level of Grave Domain Cleric.
Sure.
For the 300-foot Dark Vision.
Yeah.
And then 2 levels of Undead Pact Warlock. Taking Agonizing Blast, obviously, for the increased damage.
Oh.
And then a Pulling Blast.
Oh.
So you go 300 feet in the air. You are not reachable by most ranged attacks.
Right. Yeah.
And then you use Eldritch Blast to pull your opponents off the ground.
Now this isn't, you're missing a step here, because Eldritch Blast has a range of 120, so you've got to pick up there's a range extender as well. I don't
Spell Sniper.
Not Spell Sniper. If you pick up Spell Sniper, that'd be a 4th level thing.
That's true.
But as a warlock in your invocations, obviously you need the Pulling Blast.
Yeah.
The Agonizing Blast would be nice.
Oh, it might not have been. It might not have been Agonizing Blast.
Yeah, it's like Eldritch Spear or something silly like that.
Yes, I think that's what it was.
That doubles your range.
That's probably what it was. But either way, you're significantly higher than anybody's going to be able to reach with a range weapon.
Yeah.
You use your Eldritch Blast to pull someone up. At 3rd level, you're only going to have 1, so you're not really going to cause fall damage at that point. Right. Starting at 5th level, you're going to start causing fall damage as well, as long as you hit with both.
Because the Pulling Blast is going to pull them 10 feet.
Right. Directly up. Mm-hmm. And then theoretically, because of your Grave Domain Cleric, they are now inflicted with fear, which means they cannot move towards you. And they are prone on the ground.
So they can't stand up.
They cannot stand up.
Okay. They can crawl away, though.
They can crawl away. But being prone on the ground gives your team a great chance to just come in and beat them.
It does. Anyway, little off topic. Sorry to go so far in depth on that one. That's a funny thing to think about. I'll have to,
like I said, a little off topic, but
I have to hammer that in a little bit later.
Fun. Anyhow, so that's the basics of building a character. Is you're picking your class, you're picking your race, you pick your background, roll your stats, and through your background, you're also choosing your different personality traits that kind of give you some a path on how to play your character.
Right.
But they are only suggestions as well. Like, you can play your character however you want. It's called a role-playing game for a reason.
But if you have a hard time getting into character, D&D has provided you some tips on how to play unique characters.
Yeah. And like I said, building characters, we both very much enjoy building characters. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's a great time. It's so fun to build, see what you can build. And I think that can move us into what makes a good character.
Oh boy, what makes a good character? I think the bottom line is, if you enjoy playing it, it's a good character.
That's fair. I think a little bit more in depth. Like, obviously, like, if you enjoy playing a character, play that character.
Yeah.
But there's
some taboos you should avoid.
The caveat to that is, don't play a character that's going to ruin the good time of anybody else.
One conversation, and I know this is kind of, player versus character. You wanted to know what makes a good character. And I think, honestly, what makes a good character is someone that wants to play and have a good time. Now, I hear a lot online, especially on YouTube. I hear a lot of people talking about meta playing. And there is a certain aspect of the game where, it is a role-playing game. You should try and pretend like you're that character, right?
Yeah.
And if people are, breaking character all the time, and so let me give you an example. Let's say that you and I are in a game of D&D and we're adventuring and we're checking out this town, and I decide that I'm going to go to the library to do some research, and you decide that you're going to go and talk to the mayor, right? Well, while I'm at the library researching, the mayor is telling you, oh, hey, there's this important thing to go check out over in town hall, right? Now I'm like, okay, well, as a player, as Charles, I just heard the DM tell Connor that he should go to the town hall, the mayor's probably already in town hall, but the town center, right?
There you go.
I know that the mayor is saying, hey, go check out the town center. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to leave the library and go to the town center. That's not really playing my character.
Right. That's playing the meta. That's playing that's playing player information versus character information, which is an important distinction to make when you're playing this game.
It is, but it's also not something. So this is kind of what I was getting at. A lot of times online, I'll see people shunning that behavior, and there's good reasons to shun it because it really breaks the immersion, right? So why in the world would my character go to town center? It doesn't make any sense. But at the same time, there's a lot of times when meta is valuable and even needed.
It can be.
I think it absolutely is.
In situations.
So when you break down D&D to its bare bones and what it is and what it needs to be, it's a game about friends where one is in charge of running the world and the story, and the rest are running around engaging with that story, right? That's what a role-playing game is. Generally speaking, there's a couple of...
The only change I would make to that statement is the DM is in charge of the plot.
Yeah.
The characters are in charge of the story.
Sure, absolutely. But here's the thing. If I'm in a position as a character where I wouldn't necessarily go along with what the story is, then I'm being a bad player because I'm not engaging with the game. The fact is, it is a game.
Yeah.
It is. And if your character isn't engaging with the game, then what's the point of having a character?
If you are not playing your character in such a way as it is engaging with your DM's plot, or the other character's stories, because every character has their own story, just like every person in real life has a story.
Yeah.
Engaging with the other characters, engaging with the NPCs, learning everything you can about the world, engaging with your DM's NPCs and their worldviews, and just engaging, like you said, in the game.
Yeah.
Like the game you're playing. Don't go off and play your own game, because if at that point that is not a good character.
Right. And that's where I'm bringing the meta back around into. Your DM, and let's be honest, the other players are human. The DM is human, right? Everyone makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect. The DM tries to kind of hook the players into following their plot, right?
Yep.
They try to throw interesting things out. And let's say you've got 5 people at the table, and one of them's a rogue, and one of them's a cleric, and one of them's a barbarian, and one of them's a wizard. Okay, what hook is the DM going to come up with that's interesting to all of these players?
Right.
And sometimes that can be a very, very hard question to answer. And in reality, the answer is, I'm playing this game with my friends, and even though my wizard isn't necessarily interested in this, I'm going to do it because this is the game.
Right.
That's the meta that I encourage and that I push. You have to acknowledge that you're here to play a game.
Yeah. Right. I agree with you there. You do have to acknowledge that. I think a big part of bringing all of the characters into wanting to participate in the plot has a lot to do with session 0.
Sure.
And making and encouraging players, because I mean, you can't control people.
Right.
But as a DM, and we'll get to what makes a good DM and what makes a fun game a little bit later, but as a DM, you need to be encouraging your players to build characters with stories that either interact with the other players that the story hooks to, or having everybody have something on the line if the story unfolds, if the plot unfolds and nothing happens. Say you've got a big bad that's going to destroy town. These people, that's the hook. Like, sure, everybody wants to protect their family. So
the problem is that it's not universal.
It's not. And that's why I said you've got to talk with your players, talk with the DM, and it becomes a collaborative game in that sense.
And it is, but that's also not a perfect answer in a non-meta sense, because you and I just admitted we love theory crafting. We love building these like wacky characters with these, weird builds. And sometimes in order to make the build work, you take kind of a strange path on their personality, right? So let's talk about like the classic, edgelord rogue in the shadows, doesn't want nothing to do with nobody, right? Fact is, rogues do great damage, right?
Yeah,
they have fantastic damage output. And if you want to build a character that does that kind of thing, it's really easy to nudge yourself into this edgelord personality.
Yeah, and again, we've had characters do that.
Yeah,
where they just...
I've played characters that are supposed to be edgelords, but then at the end of the day, like, even though his motivation isn't in line with the campaign, I'm here to play the game. And I'm going to build this character because I'm interested to see what I can do with this character, not because it's the perfect character for this DM's campaign.
Which is fair. And part of that concept is obviously you're role-playing your character. Yeah. So you choose something. Like, in my opinion, as far as role-playing a character, there has to be some reason.
Yes.
Other than just the meta of it. Where you choose something, anything, as to why your character is chugging along with this party. Right. Even if this character can't stand the rest of the characters, why are they coming along? And I think that, honestly, like we've been saying, like, good players make good characters, but I think that's what makes a good character.
I think so.
Is your choices based on why.
Yeah.
Like, the character's why versus the player's why. Like, the player's why is, I'm here to have a good time with my friends. The character's why is going to be what makes a good character.
Sure. Side note, I'd like to throw a little disclaimer in here. I said that, why should I have to, make my character specific to this DM's campaign? I'm not saying that you should just ignore the model the DM's throwing out every time. Don't do that. The fact is, again, it's a collaborative game. You want to have a good time. You want to build something that makes sense and is going to be fun. And there are just some situations where you got to take a step back and say, okay, this is inappropriate for this. So, like, let's say that the DM is like, hey, guys, let's play a game where, actually, we had this exact situation. I was running Strixhaven just a few months ago, like half a year ago. Strixhaven is a game about mages going to college, right? And we sat down at session 0, and I specifically asked everyone, hey, look, I don't care if you go crazy and have fun. The one thing I'm asking is that you all play spellcasters.
Yep.
Right? And in that situation, it is inappropriate to be like, well,
I'm going to play a rogue.
Or I'm going to be a barbarian. I'm just going to smash my way. No, there's certain situations where this is not the time for this character.
Yeah.
Put a sticky note on it, shove it in the back drawer, pull it out for the next game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The other classic example I hear all the time is, gritty, medieval, no technology kind of situation. And one player's like, well, I'm going to play a spacefaring pirate. Yarg. Right? Don't do that. I'm
going to play the Terminator from the future.
Hoorah. There's definitely a time and place for every character. And sometimes you have to kind of weasel them in to make them fit.
Sometimes they just don't.
Sometimes the character just doesn't fit the campaign. And you have to be willing to accept that.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what makes a good character is, make sure it fits and figure out the why.
Yeah.
And as far as being a good player, play the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Play the game that your DM has laid out for you.
Be nice to the DM. Be nice to the other players. It's supposed to be a friendly environment. It's supposed to be a place where people can escape reality, and kind of sit back and relax and just enjoy this crazy world for a little bit. And if you're making that stressful for other players by anything that you're doing, then you don't really have much of a place at a collaborative role-playing game.
Yeah, don't try to... And something that a lot of people have a tendency to do, especially if they're super competitive, is turn D&D into a competitive game. Yeah. And it's not a competitive game. It is a collaborative game. It is not you versus the other players. It is not you versus the DM. It is everybody is working together to tell this story and see how it unfolds. The DM has the plot and what, special things that are going to happen as time goes on. And you as characters are going to explore this world and turn every session into a developing story. And honestly, I think that's my favorite part of the game, is seeing how, other than, role playing, I enjoy DMing, I enjoy role playing, I enjoy almost every aspect of this game. But watching a story unfold, watching a plot that I have created as a DM, and watching my characters, my players as their characters, explore that plot. Like the campaign we're playing now is going so good.
It's pretty funny.
I love the way the campaign's going right now. And plug, if you are interested in watching that, we're actually going to start posting it. I don't know if we're going to post that on a Patreon or post it on the YouTube channel. We haven't quite decided there.
At the very least, we're going to start recording it, and it might be available to you at some point.
It will be available. We just don't know where yet. But we have a great time in our group, and it's because everybody works together. Everybody is collaborative, and I would argue that all of our players are good players.
I would say that all of our players are at the table to have a good time.
You wouldn't agree with my statement?
So here's my one issue with your statement. It is a fun game. Yes. I enjoy it very much. It seems like the other players enjoy it. We have a habit of not getting much done.
That's true.
We run for generally about 4-hour sessions.
Yeah.
And in those 4-hour sessions, we normally get about 2 hours worth of work done.
Which,
not 2 hours worth of playtime. Honestly, it's probably everything that we do could have been summed up in about half an hour of playtime. But the fact is that our players are there to have fun, and they don't care if it's, and don't take this as advice for your table, because every table is going to be different. If you have a group that really wants to delve into a story and see how the plot develops, perfect. That's your group, play it. If you have a group that wants to sit around a table and BS and laugh and tell jokes for 2 hours, cool. That's your group if that's what you want to play.
Yeah. And that goes back to what we mentioned earlier, that this game is so different for everybody. You are going to have your own group. You're going to have your own dynamic. You're going to have your own characters, your own story. And how the game goes is going to be completely dependent on who's sitting around the table. And it, like Charles said, it could be nothing but 4 hours of straight gameplay, where it is story, exposition. Or, some days are better than others with our play group.
It's true.
But we do sit down and we play for 4 hours, and a lot of it is we get off track. We get side-railed so bad.
We have fun.
We do have a great time, though. And we still make progress.
Some
progress.
Speaking of great players, though, I know this was kind of the topic we were sitting on for a second. I do want to throw out just a little bit of advice. If you want to make sure everyone's having a great time, be considerate. Ask yourself what other players at the table want. I think, hands down, probably one of the biggest issues that players have is you'll find players that just hog the spotlight. That the only thing they're worried about is what their character is doing.
And that goes back to being a good player, that we were like, I mean, obviously, like, you're giving advice on that. It goes back to what I was saying earlier when I said don't play a solo game.
Right. And I mean, I think it's a little bit more elaborate than what we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Because when you're talking about a solo game, you're talking about initially, someone being like, okay, well, I don't care about the DM's plot. But it goes both ways. Like it can be one guy that cares so much about the plot that he doesn't let other players engage with it.
Yeah.
So definitely be considerate.
A big part of that is going to come down to the DM too.
It does. It really does, because the DM kind of is just the referee of the game.
Yeah.
And a lot of DMs take that as, okay, well, did you win? Did you lose? Did you pass? Did you fail? But they also need to be throwing up red cards and chastising players, not necessarily aggressively.
I don't know if chastise is a proper word.
Not necessarily aggressively. There are appropriate ways to handle it.
Yeah.
But if there are player disputes, the DM is responsible for handling those.
Yeah.
For the most part.
And it's not even, when he says player disputes, it's not necessarily like one player against another. If there is one character hogging the spotlight and everybody else, kind of wants their piece of attention and gameplay as well, that I would count that as a player dispute as well.
Yeah.
And it is the DM's job to nip that in the bud and make sure all of the players get their time to shine.
Yeah. And I think that really is the number one point of what would make a nice DM, is making sure that everyone is having a good time, including themselves.
Yes.
Everyone is there to play the game, including the DM. So if you're not having fun, step back, analyze, what the issues are. Maybe you need to have a conversation with your players and change things up a little bit. But everyone deserves to be having fun.
Yeah. You're playing a game.
Exactly.
The reason to play games is to have a good time.
Boy, you know what? I asked my brother why he plays games a couple months ago, and that was not his answer.
What would that answer be?
To win.
Oh my gosh.
Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised, not knowing your brother.
The thing is, if you're playing a collaborative game, the point is to have a group experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like we mentioned, and honestly, like, that is another talking point in and of its own, is what makes a good DM.
Yeah.
And I think what makes a good DM is, as you mentioned, it's making sure everybody gets their piece of the pie. It is making sure that you are prepared. For those of you that know this game, you cannot be 100% prepared for every situation your characters are going to make. They will throw you off track. I guarantee it. You can plan every possible road that you think your characters might take, and they will find a different one.
On the flip side, you also can't not prepare for everything. I get that, it's a daunting task to be like, oh, I've got to do this and this and this and this. And I'm not asking you to create all these different scenarios in your head of what you can do. But if you don't do anything, then everyone's going to be bored. We've tried a couple of times to run games where we just kind of let things go wherever they go. I know there's been certain situations where I've been flustered. Or like, okay, well, I planned all this out and you guys aren't doing any of it. So just do what you want and we'll see what happens. Well, at that point, the referee kind of checks out and no one is monitoring the game.
Right. And I think what it comes down to is, well, for those of you that are familiar with DMing, you have to have a fairly strong capability to think on your feet.
Yeah. But if all you do is think on your feet, then you're going to burn yourself out quickly.
Yes and no. Obviously, like I said, you can't prepare for every situation.
Right.
But there is a YouTube video that I believe we've both watched. I can't remember the creator. He does the How to Be a Great GM series.
I think his name is Guy.
It's probably accurate. I'm pretty sure the channel is How to Be a Great DM.
Yeah.
But he, in one of his videos, mentions that in order to be a great GM, one of the things that you need to be able to do is have your plot and give the illusion of choice. Let your players do what they're going to do. But if you had plot point A in section C, move it over to section D.
Yeah.
Like, move your plot points and your important part to give your characters, they're going to go where they're going to go, and you can move your plot to fit the characters, which is why earlier I said the characters control the story.
They do. To double down on, I guess, kind of what I was saying a second ago about not preparing, the DM's responsibility is to have a plot that the characters are going to follow however they wish to follow, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't even bother to prepare a plot.
Oh, you have to prepare a plot.
If you don't even prepare a plot, then you're not DMing the game. You're just sitting there and listening.
Yeah.
You can't do that. You've got to prepare something. You've got to have some idea on where anything is going.
Yeah. You have to have an idea of at least the end of the game. I would say you need more than that. I would say you definitely need more than that.
I disagree on the end of the game.
Really?
So a lot of times what I will do is I will prep more of a theme of the game.
Mm-hmm.
I'll throw a setting in, I'll throw a theme in, and then probably about halfway through the game, when I see how everyone is playing and what they're building and what their motivations are, then at that point it becomes easier to kind of develop what the end should look like.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
I do not start with the end in mind.
I'm not even going to lie. Like, I normally, when I start building a new campaign, I start from the end and work my way forward.
Sure.
I do the how does this happen situation, which is another thing that Guy talks about on how to be a great GM.
Yeah.
Is you start with how do you want it to end, and you're like, okay, what causes this? What causes that? What causes that? And you work your way forward until your characters get introduced to the plot.
Right. That's how I build sessions, not campaigns.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I will admit, I will be the first to admit that I have planned out campaigns, and they turn out completely different than I originally anticipated.
And that's why I don't plan the end from the beginning, because if you're like, okay, we're going to go fight this lich in this big tower, and the first thing that your group does after encountering, so a lich is an undead creature, and, a lot of times they're going to be involved with...
Lord Voldemort.
Kind of like Lord Voldemort. They're going to be an undead creature, and a lot of times they're going to be involved with kind of undead armies.
Yep.
Right? So let's say that I've got this lich, and then I start planning out, these like undead ambushes and stuff. And the players, the first time they encounter, wow, I am that boring.
No.
Oh my goodness, my bad. I'll just stop.
My bad.
The first time they encounter a zombie horde, they're just like, this is not a safe place to be, and they decide to
book it 3 towns over.
Exactly, right? They book it 3 towns over. They're not even heading in that direction anymore. Now you've got to plan a completely different campaign.
That's fair.
And so if I want my theme to be, battling the undead, and, maybe at the back of my mind, I'm like, it'd be cool if they fight a lich eventually. But I'm not, okay, the big bad is a lich. But in my mind, it's like, okay, undead. Undead is what we're doing for this game. Well, now, if, the undead are coming in, and let's say that, in the east is the big lich tower, and that's where all the undead is stemming from, right? In your scenario, where you plan the end from the beginning, and then they head west because screw that. Well, now your undead aren't, they've got to wipe across the field in order to drag them back east.
Yeah.
In my scenario, where I'm like, okay, this is an undead campaign. Well, the undead come and attack town, and they're like, I kill them, and then they run west. Well, then more undead are coming in from the west, and instead of a lich conquering scenario, this is now a zombie apocalypse scenario, and that's going to be everywhere you go, and you just can't stop it.
Okay, I see where you're going.
And I mold it to how they're reacting to it.
That's not a bad piece of advice. You know what? Especially for the people at home that are looking to get into DMing or are new to the game. Understand, especially as a player, that your DM is building this campaign for your enjoyment. And things are probably going to change beyond even what they imagined.
Usually.
But as long as everyone's having a good time and you enjoy the story, then all's good. All's good. I mean, admittedly, even the campaign we're playing right now has changed since the beginning.
Yeah, it has. know if everyone's picked up on it. Obviously, I've got a little experience with DMing. It's changed.
It's changed a lot.
I don't know what Connor has behind his screen. I don't know what he's been planning for us. But there have been some distinct right turns.
Yep. But I think it's for the better. I think I think we're on a good path now, and I have an idea of where we're going, and it's because I changed based on what the players were doing.
The game is molding to the players.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And with that being said, I mean, obviously we've talked about what makes a good GM, and being prepared is definitely part of that.
Top tier.
Yeah, probably most important. Be prepared and play with your characters. Be willing to work with your characters.
Be prepared and be flexible.
Yes. But other than being a good GM, what makes for a good game? Like, obviously, we've talked about, like, characters and DMs working together. As long as everybody's having fun, that's a good game. But what makes a good game as far as player decisions?
Honestly, you mentioned session 0 briefly before, and I think that really is the answer. So a session 0, for anyone at home that doesn't know, that's an opportunity for all of the players of the game, the players and the DM, to sit down and talk about what the game's going to be, what expectations they're going to have, what kind of theme we're looking for in the game, what kind of players we're interested in playing, and what some meta rules are. Like, some people feel very uncomfortable talking about certain topics, and if that's something that needs to be avoided, then that needs to come up before the game starts.
For example, if there is a younger player at the table and either their parent is present or their parent is against sexually explicit content.
Sure.
That's something to cover in session 0 that is not allowed at the table. I mean, we avoid that at our table as well because it's not something that we enjoy as players. But there are some players who very much like to go into detail about their sexual adventures with the NPCs.
There are plot lines in D&D that some DMs will take. So when they're building their campaign and they're thinking about the theme, sometimes DMs will want to play a darker theme that maybe involves things like slavery and bondage and abuse. And sometimes, if some of the players have experienced
some sort of trauma,
that can just be a very difficult thing for them to be involved in. And so getting that information out at the very beginning, the DM says, okay, look, I'm hoping to play kind of a dark game. We're going to have kind of some of these elements in it. That gives the players an opportunity to be like, okay, well, I'm going to be honest, I don't really feel comfortable playing that. Either, maybe we can look at a different topic, or I think I just need to sit out this game.
Right.
But giving everybody an opportunity to voice their preferences before the game starts is very, very important. So I kind of sidelined that for your question for a second to explain what a session 0 is. But again, very important. Please do it. In a session 0.
Another important part of a session 0 is players figuring out why their characters are interacting. What kind of relationships do you have?
I mean, that's 50-50. Definitely there's situations where that's critical. There's situations where it's helpful. And there's been a few situations where it's just not been relevant. And I think that depends on, again, the theme of the game.
I can see where you're coming from. I personally feel like the games that we have played have been made better when relationships are pre-established. In my opinion.
I don't agree. So a few years ago, I was playing a turtle. It was a fun game.
Yeah, that was great.
Honestly, I think in our group, we constantly, consider that as probably one of our personal favorite campaigns we've ever played. We had no connections.
That's true. That was a classic. You are in a bar.
We met in a tavern. And the first thing I did was I punched another character in the face, and then we went adventuring.
Because he was being racist towards the turtle.
Well, don't be racist. That should go without saying. But the point is, you can have a good game where there are no pre-established connections.
That's true. Okay.
But again, it depends on the theme.
Yeah.
So you look at the game we're currently playing, and we wanted kind of a theme where we're all in like this guild, and we're taking contracts to do things, right? Well, obviously, if we're all in the guild, there's got to be some kind of connection. How did we join the guild? Do any of us know each other already? And yeah, in certain themes, you're going to want connections.
Yep.
And in some themes, you have to have connections. Anyway, back to your question. Yeah. I'm sorry. Session 0. How to have a great game. In Session 0, you sit down and you ask each other, what would be a great game?
Yeah. You go back to the collaborative aspect of this game. You get everybody's input. You have the DM who's like Charles was saying, the DM's like, maybe I want to run this kind of game, and everybody gets to put their word in edgewise.
Right. And if you get through Session 0 and everyone agrees on what would be a fun game, then the only thing left to do is to fulfill that wish, to fulfill that vision of what a good game would be. Get all the players on board with making sure that the things that they want to do are getting done. Get the DM on board with making sure those opportunities are available for them to do those things. And if everyone wants to play a goofy, funky game, make sure everyone knows in Session 0, hey, this is going to be a funky, goofy game. Sweet, haha. At the end of the game, everyone had a great time. And if it's going to be a serious boots to the ground kind of game, make sure we know in Session 0, everyone's like, okay, we're going to get a lot done. Boop, boop, boop. At the end of the game, okay, we really focused. We got a lot done. That was a great game.
Yeah. Another aspect of Session 0 that we haven't covered quite yet is any homebrew rules that you're going to implement need to be put out for group discussion in Session 0. For example, we're using a separate homebrew rule based on when characters go down.
Yes.
So the base rule says that you get knocked to 0 hit points, you get healed, you're back up, you're perfectly capable, nothing negative comes of it. We have a homebrew rule implemented that says if you go down and you come back up with a level of exhaustion, which gives a little bit more of a gritty feel to it. It's not anywhere near like the actual, there is a variation of this game that is very gritty, where like a long rest is a week instead of a day. A short rest is a day instead of an hour. So that kind of makes it feel very hyper realistic rather than, high fantasy. We just added a little bit of a separate aspect to make it feel a little more realistic.
Sure. I definitely am on board with that. I think that in order to make sure everyone's consistently having a good time with any game, not RPGs, not D&D specifically, with any game, you want to make sure people understand the rules.
Yeah. Make sure everybody is on board. Everybody understands what's going on. Make sure everybody is on the same page.
There are a couple of basic rule books, and I think for the most part, people are going to be aware of what the basic rules are. And yeah, like Connor says, if you're changing any of the basic rules, make sure people are aware of what the rules are moving forward.
Absolutely. For those that are not familiar with the game and you're looking to get into it, we highly recommend that you pick up the 3 base rule books.
I only recommend the Player's Handbook.
That's fair. Yeah. The only book you need to get started is the Player's Handbook.
Quote unquote.
Need.
Quote.
Okay. Technically, you can use the SRD, which is completely free.
Technically, you can do whatever you want because it's a role-playing game with your friends.
It's a totally made-up system. Make up your own rules. Play as you go.
Hey, so none of us have rule books. We've all played a couple of times before. Let's just go.
Make it up as we go.
See what happens. I know I'm supposed to roll damage when I swing the sword.
I have played that game before.
I think I'm going to roll a D8.
13, but I have played that game before.
Yep. But no, definitely the one book that I recommend is the Player's Handbook. It is not a need.
That's fair.
It is not a need. But
I would also recommend you pick up the Dungeon Master's Guide and maybe the Monster Manual if you are really into DMing and you're interested in finding the different monsters that are available that are already blocked out. You can also buy any of these books on D&D Beyond and have a digital version, so that's really nice.
Now, those are the 3 that are recommended. Those are the big 3 that people tend to get. In my personal experience, I have read the Dungeon Master's Guide several times, like
cover to cover,
2.5 times, right? It's a slog, and I'm going to be honest, I use almost none of it.
Fair enough.
The information in the Dungeon Master's Guide is not critical to playing a game, and from my experience, most of the information in that book is not useful unless you go out of your way to make it useful. The same is true with the Monster Manual. There are a lot of monsters in the Monster Manual, and
there are a ton.
Anyone that's heard of any kind of fantasy things, you've watched Lord of the Rings, or you're familiar with Norse mythology, right? You got some stuff in your mind of if you're the DM, right? You got some stuff in your mind like, okay, well, my players are going to go and run into some frost giants. You can Google D&D frost giant, and it pulls up the stat block.
That's true,
right? You do not need a monster manual. You do not need the Dungeon Master's Guide,
and that goes back to what we mentioned earlier about this game being easily accessible.
Oh yeah,
this game is so homebrewed and so popular that you can pretty much Google and find anything you need.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely glorious as far as an entry-level game. Like, to be able to find any information you need at any time is huge.
Yeah.
And I think you pretty much covered it. The one thing you need for a great game
is to agree on what a great game is.
Yes.
And then do it.
You need session 0. And then
well, not even necessarily.
Well,
you should
session 0 as a concept.
Yeah.
Session 0, I'll be honest, as like people are agreeing on what a good game is.
As our group, we have used one session 0 as kind of a holdover for multiple games. Like one session 0 kind of got us through like 3 games in a row before we decided to do another one.
That's true.
But the bottom line is that the players and the DM need to be on board with what the basic expectations are.
Yeah. Make sure that you are playing the same game.
Yeah.
Make sure everybody wants to play that game, and make sure everybody is playing together. And
yes.
That's what makes a good game.
Absolutely.
And I don't have anything further.
Yeah, no, just, hey, if you're playing a role-playing game, play the way you want to play.
Yeah.
You being plural, play the way that you and your friends want to play.
All of you at home, play the way that makes sense for your group.
Yes. Have fun.
That is the key aspect of this game.
Yeah.
Is have fun. If you're not having fun, you're not playing it right.
Yeah, if you're not having fun, it's important if there are major issues in your game to feel comfortable being able to have kind of step aside conversations. And sometimes it's a one-on-one between the DM and one player, or the DM and 2 players, and sometimes it's a whole group conversation. But if there are issues at the table, be adults, talk it out, be like, hey, look, I know we're having fun, we're playing the game right now, but can we take a step back and just discuss something real fast that I'm having a problem with? Generally speaking, everyone at the game wants to have a good time, and that means that they want to be able to discuss what having a good time is.
Yeah. And I think that pretty much covers what we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah.
This video is getting a little bit long.
Absolutely.
So real quick before we sign out, I just wanted to do a quick, I'm going to give you 5 classes.
Okay.
And you're going to rank them 1 to 5 blindly without knowing what's coming next.
Okay.
So class number 1 is Warlock.
Warlock. So here's the problem with your ranking list is I've already got like a 1 to 12 of the basic classes in the core book. So now the question is, which ones are you excluding?
That's a good question, isn't it?
Oh boy. So let's be honest. The Warlock is very easy to jump into.
Yep.
And it's unfortunately very one-dimensional.
Can be. Depending on your patron.
Depending on your patron. Generally speaking, there are 2 ways to play a Warlock. And obviously with your different patrons, there's a little bit of variety, and you can mix it up a little bit, but it's just going to be a modification of the way to play a Warlock. So not knowing what else you're about to throw at me, I'm going to go ahead and say a Warlock, while one of my personal favorite classes to play is a 4.
Okay. Paladin.
Shouldn't have started with a 4. Well, hear me out. I love all of the classes in D&D.
Yeah.
And I love playing
Paladin. That's what makes this game so hard.
I do love playing Paladin. I love the smites. They're very effective. The thing with the Warlock versus the Paladin, though, the Warlock has, I think, less... They have more roleplay potential, but because of how niche their circumstance is compared to the rest of the world, generally that potential is never realized.
Yep.
So as far as actively role-playing, I think the Paladin is a lot easier. Let's give him the 2. Paladin is number 2.
Okay. Monk.
Definitely on par with the Paladin as far as roleplay, I think. Maybe a little less. The Paladin has got, a lot of holier than thou and big brother protector opportunities to throw his roleplay into the mix. The Monk, depending on how you want to play them, I really like Smite better than Fury of Blows. I do. It definitely does not come up as often. It does more damage, and it feels more thematic. Mm-hmm. So I will give the Monk a 3.
Okay. Druid.
I'm going to get a lot of hate for this.
You putting Druid in 1?
I'm putting Druid in 5.
Oh!
The Druid has a lot of versatility.
Yeah.
And there is a lot you can do with a Druid, but it's got kind of the opposite problem of the Warlock. The Warlock has like this really rich lore and background that you want to play, and you just never get a chance to play it. The Druid is like 90% of the time a tree hugger. They don't have a lot of cool lore going on. They grew up in the woods. They don't know nobody except maybe a couple other druids. And again, whatever you're playing your game, you do you. I'm just talking generically. Druids tend to be dull, roleplay-wise. And as far as class viability, if you're not going Circle of the Moon, then you're probably got some wacky super build you're trying to make up.
All right.
And Druid of the Moon is also very, very one-dimensional. It's
wild shape.
I'm turning into a dire wolf at level 2, and then I'm turning into a brown bear, and then it's very straightforward.
Yeah.
5. I don't personally enjoy playing druids.
That's fair. That leaves Ranger for number 1.
Wow, what a lucky coinkydink. So Ranger tends to be one of the most hated classes because it is not built to be very on par with the rest of the classes. It is not designed to keep pace with the rest of the players. It's not a great class, but growing up, I read the Ranger's Apprentice books, and I thought Rangers was cool as heck. And I watched Lord of the Rings over and over again, and Aragorn was like the coolest guy. And just the concept of a Ranger appeals to me so much. I keep going back to Ranger, and I keep trying to make it work. I love playing Ranger. It is just such a bad class. It's got to be number 1 for me.
So that puts your ranking as Ranger, Paladin, Monk, Warlock, Druid.
That is my...
Are you comfortable with that?
I can't change it.
I know you can't, but how do you feel about that ranking?
Well, here's the thing. Screw you. No, honestly, I'm not too disappointed in the ranking. Obviously, if I'd known everything beforehand, I would have changed it up a little bit.
Yeah, but that's the point of the blind rating.
It is the point of a blind rating. So, yeah, I think I'm okay with that.
Cool. With that, I think we're done for the day, for the episode. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm probably done for the year. I'm just going to take a nap. Wake me up when September ends, right?
It's not quite September yet.
No, wake me up when September ends. I don't care what you... Anyway, so until next time.
Thanks for joining us. Make sure to follow us on all of our socials: TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, at Escape the Board. Make sure to leave your questions and comments in the section below. and make sure that you leave any reviews. Help us grow this channel. We would love to reach as many people as possible.
Absolutely berate me on my stupid ranking. I understand and I deserve it. Just come at me.
Call us stupid if you want to. Just leave the comments. Until next time, make sure that you escape all of the boredom, and we'll see you next time.